All right, Keith. Thank you for joining this episode. It's going to turn out to be our first episode of this new Under the AP podcast that I'm trying out. So far, it's been really fun, kind of organizing the idea behind it and talking to people and trying to find guests. There's quite a bit of interest so far, so I'm really excited and eager to just move things forward. And again, appreciate your time today joining me. So
Well, I'm honored to be on your inaugural first one. So
yeah,
glad to
thank
be
you,
here.
thank you. So Keith Parsons in Wi-Fi. I think Keith, anybody who might decide to listen to this podcast or watch the video version of it, I think it's safe to say they already know who you are. They've heard of you before because this podcast is for Wi-Fi professionals. And when it comes to Wi-Fi, the name Keith Parsons is widely known and respected in the community. Um, so I don't think you need much of an introduction. I know that you are the man behind the WLPC conference, which is coming up here in just a few weeks. I'm excited about that. I'm going to be attending again. This, I think, is going to be my third official uh, attendance. Right before COVID,
You
I
you
happened
had
to be in.
unofficial ones?
Well, yeah, I was just going to
Oh,
say
you just came by
the
the pre-COVID one, yeah.
yeah, the pre-COVID one. I was in Phoenix already doing some work, which was great timing for me. And I reached out to you and said, Keith, I'm here on this one particular day in the afternoon. Do you care if I crash, crash the conference? And
Come
you're like,
on.
yep, come on, sit with us for the afternoon, and then next time, you know, go ahead and sign up, register for the full conference, which I've done. So
Yeah. I
thank
kind
you
of
for
feel
that.
like a crack dealer there, though. I'm a little bit of a crack dealer because I knew if you came, everyone who comes wants to come back. So,
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, um, I was at the first one was in Austin, right? Um,
yes, yes.
Several years ago, and I was working in Dallas at the time, and so my wife and I went down to Austin um, for a few days and was able to go to that very first one, which was a lot of fun. So yeah, I've been back several times or a couple of times since then. So yeah, really good stuff. I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
this one here in a few weeks.
I would much rather drive to Phoenix than driving to Austin, though. So
Oh yeah,
that
me
was a
too.
long drive.
Now that I'm also here in Utah, not too far, I think, from where you are, maybe 45 minutes away or so. Well, great. So Keith Parsons, you're very well known in the Wi-Fi community. You've been doing Wi-Fi for a very long time. But if can you kind of tell us how did you initially get into Wi-Fi and why was it something that you wanted to get into and just tell us about kind of your initial intro into Wi-Fi.
Well, it's a kind of cool story. I was running doing some other stuff in networking. I did the whole CNE thing with Novell, and then the MCSE with Microsoft, and then got involved in security and started playing a little bit with wireless. And at the time, I was producing training classes for a lady by the name of Laura Chappell. She's world famous for packet analysis. She started packet analysis. Actually, she was like at the very beginning with even Wireshark. And so we'd put on trainings for her all around the world. And I would schedule it, sell the classes, and she would just come in and teach and then go away. And we had a nice relationship. And then one day we're at dinner. It happened to be in New York City at the Marriott Marquis, the little one that goes around by Times Square. The whole restaurant turns around. And I had my sons with me, and we were talking, and she was saying something, and my kids go, "Well, you should make as much money as she does." And and one of my sons goes, "Dad, how come you don't make the money she does?" And I said, "Well, she's focused, and she just does this one thing, and she does it really, really well."
How
And
did they
so
know
she
that she
asked
made more
me,
money than you?
"Oh, it came up in the discussion, believe me." And I mean, they were teenagers at the time, so they were like, "What?"
Okay, they're a little savvy.
She had attended Catholic boarding school and was telling all sorts of stories that they had no experience to even relate to. So they were just enamored with how well could speak and everything. Anyway, so she says, "Well, what do you have to focus on something. What do you like?" And I was a CNE, I did MCSE, I do this. I was mentioning all the things, and I said, "But I really like security, and I think this wireless thing is going to take off." And she goes, "Okay." And she gets at least reaches down, grabs her purse, grabs a quarter, and says, "Heads, it's wireless," and flips a coin. And it landed on heads, and that's why I chose wireless.
So it was between,
I think
heads
I would
wireless,
have had a good time and tails would have been security. So I could have
security.
been
Wow.
focused on security, but yeah. So
Wow.
that's how I
Well,
started.
you know, I think we're all pretty lucky that, fate had you go into Wi-Fi, because I
It's
think a
it's
lot of
it's
us have
worked out well. I've
benefited from
got to
you being in
see.
Wi-Fi.
Oh, I thank you. It's been one of the best jobs I could think of, in the sense that I was never really happy doing the same thing over and over and over. And security got one of the reasons I didn't like security was doing pen testing is fun the first time and okay the second time, and the 15th time is incredibly boring. And in Wi-Fi, I've been able to go above the Arctic Circle to actually doing some designs in down in Antarctica, to inside mines, 1,800 meters deep, to planes flying in the air, airports, trains, planes, automobiles, and see the whole world. So I've been 107 countries now doing Wi-Fi. So it's allowed me to travel, allowed me to see the world, and not 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 every job will let you get temporarily into some industry and you're not stuck there. So I had to get trained in train maintenance and security around being near a train track, and learn all about trains and how they work and locomotives and all of the regulations around it, and got involved and loved it, and then could walk away and do something else.
Well, and I thought my, doing Wi-Fi in about 40 of the U.S. states was impressive. Um, you kind of beat me out
That's
there, Keith.
but it's that is an impressive number. Not everyone, one, depending on your kids, and I didn't get into this until my kids were a little bit older, which allowed me to schedule my own travel. And one of the tricks I learned really early on was something called the big rocks. So if you take a jar and you fill it with rocks and little rocks and big rocks and sand, if you start with the little rocks first and then you add the sand, and then there's no room for the big rocks. So if you put the big rocks in first and then the little rocks and you shake it, you can even add sand and it still all fits. So I learned that my children's uh, dance recitals or their games were the big rocks, and I would just load them into my calendar first. And then if anyone called to need my time, I'm like, oh well, I'm busy on that day, and then I could. I never didn't get to go to my kids' things, and I also got to travel the world. So it's all about setting priorities. And I never said, well, I have a dance recital to go to. I was just already committed.
Well, that's great because I think everyone knows someone whose job requires them to travel a lot, and it impacts their family and that dynamic. And so it's great that you found a way to make that work for your family and then professionally as well. It's admirable. Not everybody can do that, so that's great. Um, yeah, for me, just the traveling. I worked at a startup um, up until recently, and that had me on the road quite a bit. Kids were in um, high school at the time, and so they were kind of happy to have dad out of the house every now and then. Less interference for them to have to deal with. Um, so yeah,
Just as
good
long as you're
times
there
there.
for the important things.
Exactly, exactly. So all right, so back to your story then. The quarter came up heads. You decided to get into Wi-Fi. Um, but what you mentioned Wi-Fi too. You mentioned this whole wireless thing that you think it's gonna take off. Um, why
Mm-hmm.
did you think that? Where did you think the wireless networking industry was going to go? How it was going to change and evolve? What we do in technology and in networking in particularly.
Well, I have a brother-in-law who happened to be corporate counsel for Novell at one point in time, and on to other things. But for he was over in Cupertino, happened to be meeting with Steve Jobs for some other totally different things, and he comes back and he goes, "Yeah, on the plane back, they were talking about this way that you could connect up a computer to the internet and you didn't need any wires." And I'm like, "That would be so cool." And he goes, I mean, he was a lawyer. He didn't understand the technology at all. He just said, "Yeah, they're kind of working on it." So I used that as an impetus to go and find out how this thing's going to work. So Apple was just barely touching on it at that point in time. And so I just searched and I happened to find what became the CWNA program. Originally, it was a company called Planet 3 Wireless, and they were
Yeah.
just over in Denver. And they said they had a certification, and I went, "Well, I can try that." And so they didn't even have a book or anything. They said, "Well, you can take the test, but here's some articles you might want to read." And so I read up on the articles and took the test and passed it. And uh, it was really early on, and it,
So
it
they
just
had a
kind of took off.
test, but they didn't have any material. They just had the test.
They just started their first book. They was self-published. I think they went with Cybex. Um, oh, I forget who it was. Anyway,
Yeah, it was
they
Cybex.
self-published it as Planet 3 Wireless, and it came out. It was just not in production at that time. So I promised I'd buy one if they'd send me some draft copies, and we went through it. I called them and talked through it. It worked out pretty good. And then I just happened to stay
That's
in touch with them and work through some other issues. And eventually, every time they had a new one come out, you know, I was at the first CWAP class, uh, and it was crazy hard. But it
I bet.
was intriguing to think of the things you could do, that you could actually see how they worked. And the and since I had worked earlier with packet analysis on the Ethernet side with Laura Chappell, it was we have all those same things here and more, because we have the whole phi layer that kind of gets thrown away when you're doing Ethernet packet analysis.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I have some similar experiences with how I got interested in Wi-Fi. Because I mean, people who've been around the block for a bit will remember the dial-up internet days, and then shortly thereafter, we had some like DSL and cable internet and home networking token. I remember, going to BYU back in 98, I think it was 1998, and setting up a token ring network with this guy who was an information systems major who lived upstairs from me. And then I remember one time I was helping one of my buddies move, and I was carrying out his big PC case. And in the back of the case, there was an antenna sticking out. I'm like, "What is this? Is this for like, are you getting TV into your computer through an over-the-air antenna?" And he's like, "No, that's for network connectivity." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "Yeah, there's this," and this was I think before again the Wi-Fi standard. It's like, "Yeah, I got this device that you know transmits my internet or the network um, to my computer, and then I plug in our internet connection to it, and I've got connectivity." I thought that was just mind blowing. And then a few years later, I happened to be in Denver at the time, um, and I had a job that I wasn't too excited about. I'm like, I've got to find something else to do. I'm like, I wonder what happened with this whole wireless networking thing. So I started looking into that. And I found, of course, by then, this was 2003, Wi-Fi was a thing. And I actually found there was a community college there in Denver. I forget the name of it, which one it was, but they had that CWNA training guide that you were talking about, from Planet 3,
Yeah.
published by Cybex. And so I bought that and took the class and then went and got, certified my CWNA there in 2003. Um, and yeah, it
You've
was
been
just,
pretty. That's a very early on as well. It's been a long time
it,
since then.
it's been early, but there's a long gap though between my CWNA and then my next cert that I got in that CWNP, certifications. Um, but yeah, I mean,
Oh, you didn't do just
it's
one every
fun to.
year?
No, no. I went through, I don't know, probably 10 years before I got my next one, and then banged out the remaining shortly thereafter. But yeah, it's just really fun hearing about people, especially those who've been around for a while, how they got into Wi-Fi and what they like about Wi-Fi. Um, so you've been, doing Wi-Fi for more than a couple of decades. Um, where have you worked? Throughout that time, where have you worked to get more experience and to get to where you are today?
I'm I'm pretty lucky because, well, I'm also I have the worst boss in the world because I've been my own boss out of the last 23 years. I've worked for the man for about 18 months. Oh, no, actually 15 months. So I spent 6 months at Ruckus doing their professional services, and then they changed bosses on me, and so I quit because I didn't, I liked my boss, and if you give a different boss, then I'm going to leave. And I had Devin Aiken as my boss at Arrowhive doing evangelism, and I loved that. And then one day the CEO asked me to say something that wasn't true. It was really silly. I was given a presentation at Interop, and somebody in the audience asked a question, and I answered to my best of my ability. And then I got in trouble because I didn't answer, well, it's Arrowhive has a product. And I didn't think our product was very good doing that thing, so I answered them differently. And then had a little, and they didn't really get mad at me, but I just realized I didn't want to be constrained by what I said by whoever paid my paycheck. So I had about 15 months of getting paychecks, and the rest of the time for the last 23 years in Wi-Fi, I've been just working on my own, lots of consulting projects, which lets you go all over the world. But then
Well,
you
it's
never get a
amazing.
day off
Yeah, yeah.
because the
Well,
boss
you can
says, no, you're not sick. You're going to work today.
you can schedule a day off, right? But
Yeah, but
that's
it's also a double whammy. Nobody's going to pay you for not working. So you
sure,
have to pay for the
sure.
vacation and you don't get paid for being there.
So but then there's only a couple of years out of your, you know, what you would consider your Wi-Fi career where you weren't, like you said, your own boss, working for your own company. That's I didn't know that. I figured you had started doing, the WLAN professionals like 10 or 15 years ago, um, or maybe even more recent than that. So that's interesting that you've been able to do that. I mean, what's the key there? Because there are a lot of us in Wi-Fi who likely have worked for a company or several companies focusing on Wi-Fi, and a lot of us, I think about having our own, starting our own, you know, consultancy business, Wi-Fi as a Wi-Fi consultant. Um, so you having done this now for as long as you have, I mean, what can you tell us about um, being your own boss, like you said, running your own Wi-Fi consultancy company, and more importantly, keeping it growing and moving?
First thing is you always have to pay yourself first. And for me, I have to keep my business and my family totally separate. So I call it the bucket theory. So income that comes in from selling, we do some consulting gig and we get services or we sell product and we get a profit in there. That goes into one bucket. And then it has to drip over into the personal family bucket at a constant rate because your wife expects a paycheck well, I've set my wife from 20 years ago that we get paid monthly, not biweekly. And so every month there's the same amount of money there and it's been there every single time. So my wife never had to worry about that. The downside of that is I can't get excited when I get a really big deal and make, oh, we just made $80,000 off this one project. Because if I tell it to her, then she's going to spend it. Because if I tell her that, I also have to tell her, we haven't made any money for the last 3 months. And then she'd be all nervous. So we have kind of this little Chinese firewall in between family and work. And I have to just personally take that brunt and go, yeah, if it's a bad month, my wife and my family don't need to know that. But The sad part is if it's a good month, they still don't need to know that because then they'll go for the ride up and down. And it's your own business. There are rides up and down. I once had a big contract with IBM, and we did a 74 city tour around the world with between IBM and Compaq and Novell, and they paid us all. But it's IBM, and my first invoice went in, and they came back and said, "Oh, we'll pay you in 90 days." And we had, and that was after the first like 20 cities, and we had all those expenses, and they're like, "Yeah, 90 days from now, you'll get paid." And it actually ended up being about 120 days. That was not a good 120 days of my life.
So you had to
Yeah,
float
that was
all of
pretty
those
ugly.
expenses, travel expenses, everything involved with doing what you were doing. You had to float all that yourself before the money started
Yeah,
coming in.
and so you, but
Yikes!
that's also the learning. That was me. I should have known better. I didn't. I was young in my career, and I thought, big IBM, we want that. And what I found is I don't really like working for really super big companies because they have policies like that, and you're the little teeny company. I did a lot of work for Air Magnet for a while, and did a bunch of their pro services kind of work. It wasn't their business, but when someone asked, they would send them my way, and they were really good at paying me at like net zero. I'd send them an invoice and they'd send me a check like the same time. If I really needed money, they would wire it into my bank account. They were fantastic to work with. They got bought by a big company who then changed from 30 days to 90 days to 120 days. And I finally
Hmm.
talked to their accountant and he said, "Keith, I get paid a bonus if I stretch you out. I'm going to stretch you out and you don't have any clout. You're just a little company and yeah, that's our life. And so either live with 120 days or we'll find someone else." And I said, "We got to find someone else because I can't, that's not fair." And they're like, he goes, "It's not about fair. It's about how I get my bonus." So I've fired a lot
Wow!
of big companies because
Wow!
it's, they seem like a good place to go, but they have rules. And as a small independent site, you know, it's pretty tough.
Yeah, I can't believe he came out and said it impacts it. That impacts my bonus, so I'm not going to do it. Uh, some gall. All right. Well.
I did send him a happy bonus card though later.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, when he actually ended up paying me, I sent him a bonus card.
Oh.
You never know; he might work for another company someday and want to keep that relationship. So, another one: don't
Yeah.
burn
Well,
bridges. So,
smart.
my
Yeah. No. Very
recommendation is
smart.
keep keep your money separate. Keep your credit cards, your family credit card, and your work credit card, and don't mix the two. Have a good tax accountant. I don't think you need a bookkeeper because that's just monthly extra work. You just need someone to help you with your taxes at the end of the year. And I found a great guy that I run today. It's multi million dollar business, and I don't have a bookkeeper. I don't track anything. I just at the once a year I give access to my bank accounts to the accountant. He does all the accounts, pays the taxes, and we're all done. So, and I have an MBA in and an undergraduate in finance. So it's not like I don't understand the financial side. It just doesn't really matter. If you have more money than you had last month, you did. It was a good month.
Nice. So, how many people do you have now working for you as in this WLAN Professionals company?
Zero. I used
How's
to
that?
have a company and we had 15 employees and they were all W-2 employees. And I did not enjoy that scenario, especially when they would leave and then they would file for unemployment. And most people don't understand, but if you're the employer, and even if you fire someone for cause, I had someone I fired for stealing, I ended up paying their unemployment for the next. So my unemployment actually,
Hmm.
my unemployment insurance rose the same amount that they got as unemployment. So your employer ends up paying your unemployment even when you leave. So I switched probably 10, 15 years ago to all 1099. So I just have contractors. So I went from 15 employees to I've had up to 30 contractors working for me on different jobs, but they're all 1099. Right now, I probably have. I sold off the ECHO ECSE training business, and I had about 12 trainers working for me there, and they all report
Wow.
directly to ECHO now. So I keep between 3 and 5 contractors working for me, depending on the projects that come up, and they all have their own businesses. and I sometimes they get really busy, and I have to find someone else to help me because they're successful, and that's good for them. I
So
don't
when you sold
promise
that
anyone that
Ekahau,
kind of work.
okay, when you sold that Ekahau training business um, to Ekahau, I assume, is that when they brought on
Hmm.
Matt and Mac to kind of take
Yeah.
over that side of things? Interesting.
Uh-huh.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then
All right.
the
So is
instructors, which used to report to me, went and report to them now.
gotcha. That's cool. So is throughout your career in the different roles and jobs that you've had, um, is there one that was you know you know that really kind of uh, what am I trying to say? I guess was there a particular role that was most impactful for you in growing your career in Wi-Fi? Was it a company early on that you worked for? Was it a particular project you had? Like what would you say was like that one job or that one project or that one role that was the most impactful, the most helpful for you in your career?
And it's an easy answer. And it wasn't a single role or a job. It was after I realized you really need to understand the CWAP level stuff, the packet analysis. That when a customer calls and they want you to solve a problem, they want the problem solved. I mean, that's what they're paying you for. And so you have to get down to the packet level nitty gritty to get down there and see which client said what to which AP and why did it fail. Because if you can't prove that it was a failure, I mean, there's many times, and I don't mean to harp on Cisco at all. I'll just use them as an example. But I've had the same problems with Aruba and Ruckus and Extreme and Aerohive. Is a customer says our system is doing XYZ problem. You go and look, and the client sent a certain frame to the access point, and the access point didn't respond the way the protocol expected it to. And so then the client failed. Well, Cisco is going to point the figure at Apple, and Apple is going to point their figure at Cisco. And the purchasing agent in the middle might be the reason because they bought a Chromebook that didn't have a 5 gig radio, and so now they're expecting this. And I mean, there's all sorts of things, but you need to get down to the nitty gritty to find the solutions. And once I realized that, consulting got really, really fast because you could get the problem very quickly. Which is another reason why also another recommendation is I only bill by day. I haven't billed by hour in probably 25, 30 years because sometimes you can fix a problem in 10 minutes. Somebody flew me all the way to Dubai in a private jet, and I fixed the problem in one question. I just logged on and said,
Wow.
how come I'm on VLAN 212? And he goes, Wi-Fi is supposed to be on VLAN 211. Click, click, click. Switch the APs to a different VLAN. Amazing, the Wi-Fi works. Thanks for solving our problem. And you're like, that was it? Yeah, we're done. Well, thanks. Have some fun. Enjoy Dubai. That's a long flight for a little problem. And I'm glad I charged for the project rather than the actual time. And they were satisfied because it solved what they had as the issue, and they could not figure it out. And it was just the wrong VLAN assignment. So it's being able to look at the situation and understand both the wired network, the wired infrastructure, but there's a lot of people who understand VLANs and how wired infrastructure works. There's fewer people who can look at what's going on in the air and give you a pretty quick assessment of what's going on. And I mean, sometimes it's as easy as using Adrian's Wi-Fi Explorer Pro. You fire it up and you just watch it for 5 minutes, and you should be able to come up with a ton of issues that you can solve with that single look that happens. In fact, Devin Aiken wrote an entire 2-day course on, he calls it wireless adjuster, and it's just using a simple program, and not the Adrian's program simple, but a simple view of what's going on in the air that you can't see with your naked eye, but all of a sudden it's sitting in front of you. And if you know where to look, answers just jump right out at you.
It really is amazing, especially with where we are now with Wi-Fi and how long Wi-Fi has been out and how common it is. It still surprises me, and I don't know why it does, but it does, that those types of issues that you just described, like wrong VLAN, still very much occur. today for lots of different companies because I've run into that. My previous company, the startup that I worked for, they would tell us, "Hey, your devices aren't working here in this area," and so of course it's our fault until we prove otherwise, right? And so we'd go there, get the PCAP out, and do some testing, and tell them, "Yeah, when our devices are in this area connected to this AP, they're suddenly on a different VLAN and they can't communicate with the application server that's on a different VLAN because you've got that segmented." I'm like, "Oh, let me check that." And sure enough, those types of issues that many of
Yeah.
us think are just very straightforward and easy to find are out there in abundance even today, I think.
Well, a couple of days ago, well, I don't know when you're going to post this, but in the end of 2022, 2023, there was some talk on Twitter about, do you need to replicate the problem in order
I
to
saw
do
that.
the troubleshooting? And 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 there's two sides to that, and I can see how both sides to it. But one of the things I like to do best, for a long time, I did a lot of work in hospitals, and nurses would complain about all sorts of things because their work is tied to Wi-Fi, and if their Wi-Fi is not working, their work doesn't work, and it compounds things. And so they would say, "Yeah, we have a coverage hole." And I love when people say that because I have not physically seen a coverage hole in 15 years anywhere on any customer ever. There has not been a coverage hole, but that's how they describe it. And
Yep.
so they get their little cow or workstation on wheels and they drive around. They say, "Come follow me." And when we're going along, and one of my best tricks is like get my phone and said, "Yeah, we're going to be at this for an hour. How about if we listen to music?" So I find something on Spotify that they like. "Oh, you like country western?" I hate country western, but I'll do it for them. And I put it in my pocket, and we're now playing music over the Wi-Fi. And as they're pushing their little cart and they get someplace and they go, "See, it just died right here." And I said, "Really? Your Wi-Fi died?" And I pull out my phone and go, the music we're listening to is still playing. It has a Spotify buffer, so if we wait, it would go away if it broke. But I've also been pinging your device, and my ping is still live. And so your device is still talking to the internet, all the way to the internet, all the way around. "Well, how come it made me put my password in again?" Well, now that's a good question. That is not caused by a hole in the coverage. Why did your station tell you to put your password again? And it was some timeout that some system had, and it happened to be always at that spot because when they left the nurse's station, they took the same path, and when they got there, it was the same time, and so it died around the same place. And it was just a timeout value in their SaaS application. And we fixed that without touching the Wi-Fi. And so I like using the term mean time to innocence to show that it's not a Wi-Fi problem, and we can show that all sorts of ways. Usually just by having a phone that does the thing that they think it doesn't, and your phone's doing it, and their phone is doing it as well, but some other device doesn't, and then it'll let you figure out what the problem is. So
Yeah.
I'm not quite into the you must replicate the exact problem, but it's kind of fun to do those things and let them realize, "Oh, there's an access point above my head. So it's probably not a coverage issue because it's lights on and it's got this blinky." And you can even teach them color codes. And pretty soon the nurses are troubleshooting their own work. And they call the help desk going, "Yeah, I'm still connected. I have this. My phone's doing this. I'm staying on Spotify. I'm pinging my device. How come?" And then now they've escalated inside of the help desk way up the line and solve the actual problem that's going on rather than the default, "Oh, Wi-Fi doesn't work."
Yeah. It used to really frustrate me when, Wi-Fi, of course, we get the blame when things don't work because Wi-Fi has become synonymous with just the internet or just
Yeah,
connectivity, right? Even when your cell phone voice call isn't working right or is bad quality,
it's a
it's
Wi-Fi
because the
problem.
Wi-Fi is bad, right? It used to really
Yeah,
annoy
my,
me,
my wife's
frustrate
been
me.
married to me. My wife's been married to me for the entire time I've been in Wi-Fi. And just this morning, she said, "How come the Wi-Fi is not working?" I've got 7 APs in my house. I have 6 gig and 5 gig and 2.4, and it is saturated. And I'm on channels nobody else in the neighborhood's on. You're not going to have a Wi-Fi problem here. "Well, how come this thing?" And I'm like, "Let's go
It's a different
find
question.
out."
Yeah, but I was going to say that used to frustrate me, but you know, it keeps us in Wi-Fi happily employed. when everything is a Wi-Fi
That's true.
problem, when we know it's probably more often than not a Wi-Fi problem. But if they think it is, then they have to hire somebody to come out and fix it, right? So it's a good thing for us, I think. Not something to be frustrated with. All right, so one last question for you. So you're obviously very well known in the Wi-Fi community. Um, you like I said before, you do the conferences. You've been around for a long time. You've trained a lot of people. You've done a lot with your own podcasts and other training videos and whatnot. Um, so you have a lot of what I would say like notoriety in the community, right? And so how do you feel about that? Do you like having that notoriety? Do you like being known by so many people? And have you experienced any kind of downside to just being well known in this community?
I haven't noticed any downside, uh, and any notoriety I have, I'm not just trying to be humble. I don't see it that way because I know so many people who are smarter than I am. But what I like is the ability that I can help other people. One of the things that just feels good is you're starting a podcast. Great. I talked to Roel and Francois years ago when Roel was thinking about it. And now his podcast is way more popular than mine ever was. He's done a fantastic job. People who had started at WLPC and they had a little session, now they're putting on huge, they're some of the keynote sessions we put on, and they've come a long way. So my if there's any notoriety, it's just I'm glad to be able to help people along the way because um, I found years ago, and I was talking because David Coleman, I'm CWNE number 3, and he's CWNE number 4, and worked with Kimberly Graves, she's number 2, and I worked with Devin Aiken. So some of us have been around since the very, very beginning, and if you ask David Coleman about why, he wrote a book and it's made him famous, and he hasn't made a lot of money off of the book. In fact, for the first couple of years, he was less than minimum wage for the number of hours to what he actually earned. But it gave you access to be able to do consulting work or to get a job when he first got his job at Arrowhive because of that background. So I strongly recommend people either podcast or everyone should start blogging and writing down what you learned about Wi-Fi. It's a fantastic way to remember. Just use it as a backstop. One of the conferences I do is the Tech Field Days, and every one of the Tech Field Day delegates is a blogger. That's how they kind of get there, and every single one has said the same thing. I've Googled a problem that I know I was having, and the answer came back to my blog. Meaning, at some point in my life, I knew it enough. I had a problem. I looked it up. I wrote down the answer, and I forgot it enough that I had to Google myself again. That's what the value of blogs is, just for yourself if you're going to do nothing but get it back. But along the way, other people read those blogs and get along at the same time. So I suggest people do a lot of the blogging or podcasting for no other reason than it gives you a place where you can save your own information, and it gives you a little of the notoriety. Not that it's going to make you a lot more money, but people will now come to you for answers. And if they have a problem and you're a consultant and they need it, you have something that you can offer them. So it's kind of cheap advertising, really. Um, I've never had to do any kind of marketing or advertising. It's all word of mouth. And so the podcasts have always been free. Our weekly newsletters are free. All of the data, all of the videos and presentations from WLPC we share for free, just because it's a way, to have cheap advertising, and it's good for the community and it's good all around. So I strongly suggest make more content. It can't hurt you, and it can help the community.
Well, thanks. I do have a one story to kind of wrap up what you just said from my own experiences. So yes, with when I tweeted and posted on LinkedIn that I was going to start this new podcast, um, you were one of the first who reached out and said, "I'm happy to help. Let me know." So you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. And another example of that is, and I'm sure you don't remember this because you deal with lots of people over your career, but I back in 2010 or 11, I was working at a company called Wavelink in Salt Lake, and they had like a vendor agnostic, Wi-Fi infrastructure management platform. This was just before controllers were coming out, and you had to when you had APs, they were autonomous APs, and nobody wanted to go and connect to each AP individually and manually change things. So the software would allow people to manage their infrastructure, similar to what you have today with a controller, right? And but because of controllers, they started to phase out that product, and because I didn't want to be a software engineer, I got laid off basically. I said, well, we don't have a spot for you then if you don't want to do software. I'm like, oh, okay. I want to stick with Wi-Fi. I know that. And so I was unemployed. This was in, 2011, I think. Unemployed for about 4 or 5 months. And I was, just during that time trying to learn more and more. And I remember, I don't know where I came across your name, or even your contact info, but I reached out because I was trying to get some more hands-on with tools. Because at Wavelink, I got my first real hands-on with enterprise, wireless infrastructure, Symbol APs, early Cisco APs, Proxim APs, and so now I wanted to get more hands-on with tools that were around, and I got a hold of you. I think I even I don't remember if it was an email or if we actually had a phone call. But you're like, I've got a ton of this gear. I'm happy to let you borrow some of it. I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, you don't even know me. How can you, how can you be willing to just let me borrow some of this expensive tools? I never ended up taking you up on that offer because I actually, we moved to Dallas. I got a job with Cisco there in Dallas, but it always impressed me that you made that offer, not even knowing who I was. Again, another example of, like you said, you like to help people, and you really put in the effort to help people, and I think many in the community have benefited from that through your efforts. So again, thank you for that. So that's the end of what I call the beacon segment of the show, where we get to learn more about a guest, and how they got into Wi-Fi and the why and whatnot. This next segment is what I currently call the noise floor. It's where we have a topic, a Wi-Fi topic, and we talk about it. Now, normally, I hope to have 2 guests on per episode, and I've got myself and Trent Cutler, who's my current guest co-host. He's actually, today he couldn't make it because he was taking his son skiing right after school today. So he's up and having fun up in the mountains right now. So it's just the 2 of us, but I wanted to kind of discuss a bit, and I don't know how you're doing on time. Hopefully you have at least 20 more minutes. But I want to talk more about the WLPC.
Okay.
Sorry,
we can talk about WLPC.
Okay, cool.
Oh, sorry. We can talk about WLPC.
So, awesome. So I'd like to know more about how did the WLPC conference, how did it start? What's its origin story? Where did you get this idea? And what was it like just kicking off starting a conference for a whole industry? I mean, how did that work out, and how'd you get there?
First, I was watching Tech Field Day, something put on by Stephen Foskett. He started the whole Tech Field Day series, and he even named them like a field day where you get to go out and do stuff. You're not in class, you're on the field day. And he would have bloggers, 12 bloggers, come and be a delegate, and you sit in a room, and every 2 hours a different vendor presents to you. And after a couple of years, I was blogging more, and I was invited to be a delegate and loved the experience. Fantastic experience. But his business model is tied around the vendors pay for everything and the delegates pay for nothing, but you get free travel, free room and board, and maybe you get some swag, but you get to talk to the CTOs of companies, you get to have some influence, and you just get to hang out with 12 other guys who are as passionate about your technology as you are. And I went, how can I recreate that? And I couldn't figure out a business model that would work and not compete with Stephen, but also have it grow. His audience is way bigger than the 12 delegates. That's what he's selling to the vendors so they can present to this huge video audience, and it's worked for him for a decade or more. So I just kind of flipped the regular conference on its head and said, normal conferences you go, and because you sometimes you don't pay very much, or you pay $50 or $120, but the conference is really expensive. Well, where does the money come from? Well, it comes from vendors, and vendors use a conference as gen lead. They want to get lead generation. They want to find out and have more people that they can call and sell stuff to. And so they sponsor the conference, platinum, gold, silver. They sponsor a lunch or a dinner. They buy a slot to speak, because if you're this sponsor, you get this speaking slot. They have a booth and they scan your badge and all the things about. What I realized was, if you go to one of those conferences, you are the target audience. You think you're going for yourself. You're just going to feed the vendors' sales and marketing teams to become a badge. So I just flipped the whole thing on them and said, we're going to have a conference where it's just Wi-Fi people who like to hang out together. And yeah, the business model is they have to pay because there's no vendors paying the other part, so it's not going to be cheap. And let's just give the WM professionals topics they like and let them vote on it. And if they want something, we give it to them. It's really, really complex because I just ask people what they want and then I give it to them. That's it. And it's worked for the last 17 conferences. And every time we try a couple things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, and we then adapt. And it's really just how do you make something where people want to be there. And so you've attended and you want to come back. How do we do?
Really well, because like I said, I at the start of the show, I think I've been to four of them total, if you count, you know, half a day, one year as being to one. And yeah, so it really is neat because I remember, especially the very first one I went to in Austin. You know, at the time, you know, I was reading all these other, you know, Wi-Fi professionals, these engineers' blogs. I remember like there's some names, Andrew Vanage or Vanage,
Panache, yeah.
Vanage.
Revolution Wi-Fi, yeah.
I think Blake Crony.
Crony, yeah.
Who else? There was a couple more at the time who had blogs who you know were doing a lot in Wi-Fi, had you know all the certs and whatnot, good things to talk about. And I remember going to this conference, and it was lunchtime. We broke, and I just found a few of these guys, and I wasn't really sitting with them during the conference. I was there, like I said, just by myself. My wife came down with me, but she was off doing something else during the conference. So I just kind of, in a good stalker fashion, kind of followed some of these guys to where they were going for lunch. Like, hey guys, do you mind if I join you? Can I sit here at your table? And like, yeah, sure, go ahead. It's open seating. And just sat down and started talking to these guys. And it was awesome because at the time I was still learning quite a bit about Wi-Fi. And again, reading these guys' blogs and you know, kind of following what they're doing, and now I'm able to sit and talk with them in person. So it was really neat. I really loved that aspect of the conference. It's bringing everyone together. And then also at the time, I really loved the swag bag. You know, all of the
Yeah, we had
different
some pretty good swag bags.
APs and
Yeah.
toys. Yeah. So yeah, you know, the
Yeah, just
WLPC, I've really enjoyed
again,
it throughout
it's
the years.
give people what they want. Yeah. So that's the whole magic. I
So
was just on a podcast this morning talking with a guy named Keith Townsend who runs CTO Advisor, and he just said, you know what? We're going to do a conference just like yours. Goes, we'll probably call it an unconference because it's kind of upside down with vendors not needing to pay everything. But we do get a lot of vendors coming, but it's the people. It's not the vendor company itself. It's the people that come.
Right. Right. And that's actually fun. It's fun to just to have everyone there, and there's no huge like vendor presence like you're describing. That's kind of driving everything. It's like you said, it's the people. Um, so why do you do it? Like, what do what drove you to do? Why did you want to do this in the beginning? And why do you keep doing it year after year?
Because actually, my wife asked me on the first time. Good thing she didn't ask me how much I risked money wise on the first one. Because if people hadn't shown up, I still owed the hotel, and it's a little scary. uh, she goes, "Why do you do it?" And I said, "Because I wanted a conference, and all the ones I went to were kind of the opposite of what I wanted. I am people trying to get me to. I just want to be with my friends, and so I made something where I could be with my friends. And so now every year I get to go be with my friends, and it's kind of nice. So I keep doing it because it works. I enjoy it. I enjoy the content. I enjoy hanging out with everyone, and truthfully, it's not that much work. I mean, yeah, I've been busy for a couple of weeks now, but we'll as soon as it's over, we'll kind of take a break, and then we'll start later in August working up to the Prague one, and so it's not as hard as you'd think to pull it off. I've got really good people working behind the scenes, and we've done it enough times. We used to rent equipment, and now we own all our own equipment. So all of the projectors and screens and audio and video and stage and lighting, we so they're ours. So every year I just reinvest to get a little bit more stuff, and it's kind of fun. So yeah, the easy answer
What
is
have
I
you?
enjoy it.
Yeah, from conference to conference, what have you changed? Um, how has the conference evolved throughout the years, and what did you find that didn't
Yeah.
quite work the way you thought it would, and what's been working? And so yeah, just how's it evolved?
So probably more customization. So the first one, everyone got the same big swag bag, and we could pull that off because I negotiated with some vendors to get some stuff. But when got to hundreds of people, the vendors weren't going to give me hundreds of the same thing anymore. I could get in small quantities, and then I realized not everyone wants everything. The first year everyone got actually the second year everyone got a DBX from MetaGeek that I bought and put in the swag bag so they would have them. And well, the next year, 85% of the people who came were for the year before, so they don't need another one. So I had to keep adjusting it. So we added deep dives where you the first night's bag you pick up doesn't have a lot of swag in it because we focus it on whatever the session you're taking. So this year we added a new drone class. So if you come to the drone session, you get a drone you can fly away. We had 3D printers that people could get. We had point-to-point links that people could get. So we kind of changed it to adjust from everyone getting the same thing to letting people get closer. And the second big thing is we changed from conference tracks, where there was the enterprise track and maybe a VAR track. And we tried that for a while, and then it became competition between which room had more people, and then trying to balance who's in which room. And instead, we just keep everyone in one big main ballroom, and instead we shortened the amount of time people can present. And that's been a godsend. It's been fantastic because now we focus, and you force someone to talk in only 20-minute chunks or 10-minute chunks, and they have to throw out all the fluff. You can't give it. Well, some people have given a preliminary. Here's who I am introduction for 7 of the 10 minutes. Then they don't have any time to deliver. So by forcing
Right.
people to into smaller chunks, we get higher quality presentations. And what it also does for us is we get not only get a higher quality presentation. If you're bored with that one, you just wait 10 minutes and there'll be a new topic coming. Sorry.
Well, that's interesting. And now that you mentioned those things, I do kind of remember some of those changes. I remember like when you had different tracks, you can go to this one or you can go to this one. You go to this one, but then you're wondering, well, what are they talking about in this one? you know. Um, So I kind of
Yeah,
like how it is
and
now,
that's why we
where
started
we're
videotaping
together.
them all. Yeah, that was the reason we went to Prime Image Media to do the videotaping. That was the same guys who do Tech Field Days video work, and they record them all so that we could, if you went in the wrong track, you could at least get the stuff from the other track. So I think that was one of the things we liked. We added that we've been recording them all, and they're all available for free download. Anyone can get access to it. And like I say, in every single time I do an intro, knowledge is like manure. If you spread it around, it helps things grow. If you hang on to it, you just stink.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, we appreciate those putting those videos on. I didn't make the well, I never make the ones over in Europe, and the ones I don't make here in the U.S. I enjoy watching the videos because I'm still really curious about what people are talking about. It's always nice to be able to just have quick and easy access, free access to those videos. All right, so we have another the WLPC for 2023 in Phoenix coming up here in just a few weeks. What can we expect from that one? What are you excited about? What should we all be excited about who are going?
Just more of the same. If you're new to the conference, just come and enjoy the ambiance of people there who like what you like. And I strongly suggest they do what you did. If there's somebody talking and they're like getting a little group, just nudge yourself in there and talk with them. In fact, one of the things I say at the beginning of the intro is if you're ever in a group talking with some friends, make sure you always leave it open so somebody else can come join in. Because I think the community is actually very open and willing to help other people along the way.
Yeah, me too.
If you come to WPC and you feel alone, that's your own fault because there's lots of people there who'd be your friends. And there's so many, I mean, there's Lego building, there's whiskey and wireless if you're into whiskey, there's pub quiz nights, there's early morning running, early morning yoga, there's a prayer meeting, there's activities in the morning before the conference, there's activities after the conference at night. Plan on just enjoying yourself the entire time. You're not going to get a whole lot of sleep, but that's okay. You can sleep when you're dead, right?
No doubt. Well, Keith, thanks again. I appreciate the time you spent with me today, letting me just ask you question after question. You are, again, like I said before, you really do uh, walk the walk as far as being like a mentor for people in the Wi-Fi community and being always, you know, willing to help people. And so I, for one, appreciate that. And I think I, voice many other people in the community as well in appreciation for all that you've continued to contribute to the community. So thank you again for being guest number one on Under the AP. And we'll see you in Phoenix in just a few weeks.
Good luck with the podcast. Maybe you can even do a podcast with all the folks that are down in WPC.
I hope to. Yeah, I really hope to. I'm planning on it. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, you have a lot of guests all at one place. So
Yeah,
thank you
exactly. A
much.
lot of good
See ya.
content. All right. Thanks a lot, Keith. Take care.